This is the Bible Ranger, and today is the interpretation of tongues. It's actually part 9 of episode 143. Okay, we have covered almost all these. Today will be the interpretation of tongues, that one right here. And then the next one will be discerning of spirits. I'll give you a little heads up of what's coming up. After the discerning of spirits, we're going to hit all the motivational gifts in one fast swoop. And then a very important lesson is going to be, are the gifts, have they ceased or have they continued? And the Baptists believe that they have ceased. And they have good points, and we will cover them. And the Pentecostal / Charismatics believe they are still continuing. And I mean, we want to be right. So we'll use the Bible and we'll have both points. And that'll be a very good teaching too. Okay, let's be clear. This gift of interpretation of tongues is not the gift of translation of tongues. Let's explain that. A translation deals with written text, okay, and it's a word for word rendering from one language to another and is more exact. Now, the interpretation of tongues, it's spoken and happens in real time. And it's basically, or generally, an explanation of what has been spoken. For example, you might get a situation where somebody's speaking in tongues, and let's say they lasted 30 seconds, while the translation is like 15 seconds, and you're thinking, okay, something's missing here. As an example, you're interpreting for somebody who wants a job, and he's telling you that this job is a lifelong dream of his. He's giving you his qualifications, basically his resume, and then you turn around and talk to the boss, and you say that he wants this job. You gave them a general idea of what he said. Okay, now in Greek, the word for interpretation is hermenia, and its origin comes from Greek mythology. If you remember that, there was a god named Hermes. Hermes is the one that had wing on his ankles, and he had a helmet that also had wings on it. And he was the one racing back and forth, and he brought messages from the gods to the mortals. Well, you can't really speak about the interpretation of tongues until you speak about tongues, right? So let's give the interpretation of tongues a definition. For the gift of interpretation, the definition is the supernatural revealing of a general meaning of an utterance in tongue. Now in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, Paul says, if you speak in tongues, also pray for the interpretation. Why would that be? Because in your spirit, you're speaking in tongues, and God knows what you're saying, but in my human mind, you have no idea what you're saying. So it won't feel like it's just non-words coming out. You pray for interpretation. I've never gotten that. The times that I've spoken in tongues in my prayer, that's never happened to me. And you're thinking, but Bible Ranger, the church spoke in foreign languages other than their own. Yeah, that is true. They did speak in foreign languages in Acts chapter 2. Let's read it. In Acts chapter 2, verses 16 through 15, which is the day of Pentecost, the Christians were speaking at least 13 foreign languages. And there was visitors there. There was a bunch of visitors. And they said, we can hear them speak in our own tongue. That is true. Now think about it. If they are speaking in foreign languages, you don't need an interpretation because they understand what they're saying. So no interpretation is needed, since they could be understood. Just like we have foreign tongues, we also have unknown tongues. Now this is an example of an unknown tongue. In 1 Corinthians 14:3, it says that the one speaking in tongues does not speak to people but to God. For no one understands him. He speaks mysteries by the Spirit. For this, an interpretation is needed, right? If you actually want to know what you're saying. If you don't, then don't ask for it, okay? Because nobody understands it. So anybody who hears you is not going to understand it either. That's why it's between you and God. Now there's another example in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 2 through 4. Paul was stoned and probably temporarily dead, okay, because he had a situation. He doesn't even name himself. He says, I knew a man 14 years ago. But all the theologians, they agree that this is Paul speaking. Now, Paul was caught to the third heaven. And if you don't know what that is, the atmosphere of Earth, where the airplanes basically are flying, that's considered the first heaven. Now, outer space with the planets and everything else out there, that's the second heaven. And then the third heaven would be God's dwelling. And that's what he means by he says, I was caught up to the third heaven. Now, Paul was probably the smartest of us Christians, okay? Yet he could not and was not allowed to even speak what he heard when he was in the third heaven. So how do we receive it? Like the gift of knowledge, God reveals it. Okay? As you speak in tongues, ask God for the interpretation. You might get it. Now let's talk more about a corporate setting. If you're in a church setting and there's an interpretation of tongues, why is the message directed towards the people instead of God? Like when you're speaking to God in tongues, between you and God, right? Basically, tongues is a prayer and is directed to God. That's generally correct. When in a corporate setting, it's still a prayer to God, but the subject matter is to the people, the church. Now, I didn't know this myself. I got that from other learned brothers. Like this particular one, I got it from Pastor Alan Nolan. Anyway, he says you have three principles concerning the gifts of interpretation. Number one, the Greek word for interpretation can either mean interpretation or explanation. So it can be called the gift of explanation on what was spoken in tongues. Now, you ever heard somebody say, we have a message in tongues? Well, this is not exactly said correctly, okay? Because tongues is a prayer that's voicing the will of God when the Holy Spirit intercedes, basically for us, right? Number two, principle number two, the interpretation is usually addressed to a person or persons that prayer is about. Number three, the message is the gift of what's spoken in tongues. The interpretation is a general explanation. All right. Now, when it comes to salvation, there's no interpretation needed. It's basically simple. It's this. Everybody knows this. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. You got to confess it. You got to say it out loud. Okay? You say, Lord, I'm so sorry, Lord. I messed up, and I accept Jesus as my sacrificial gift. And you follow him. It's not difficult to do, but you living your life for Christ is not a simple thing. It's a sacrifice on your part, but the ends will be rewarding. And if you found this teaching to be valuable in this video, and I like to pass it to other people, but the algorithm likes thumbs up. So at a minimum, just hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you can. And look at this picture. I love this picture. I have a picture like this in my living room where it's different than this, but it's a centurion, a pagan guy here. He's looking at Jesus, and there was an earthquake. There was basically a big shadow over the earth for hours, like an eclipse, but it was for hours. And even he said, truly, this was the Son of God. It must have been so impacting actually being there and doing it, and just seeing it up close is incredible. Even he's repenting. So this is the Bible Ranger, keeping the Bible simple yet rich in content. Thank you very much.